Welcome to Don't Fear the Podcast, the most fun you will have being scared. On this episode, we're taking a closer look at the phenomenon called Scream, the Scream franchise, especially the very first film with Sidney, Gale, Dewey, and Ghostface. My name is Jim Fry. I am one of your co-hosts and the editor-in-chief of thescareguy.com. My partner in crime tonight is the director of media for thescareguy.com, Cheeseman on the couch.
What's up, everybody? Good to be here.
Good to have you.
Ready to talk Scream.
Yes, our guests tonight are intimately familiar with the Scream franchise. Anthony Masi, who has been on the show before, we're so glad to have him back. He is the producer of the popular documentary about Scream called Still Screaming, the Ultimate Scary Movie Retrospective. He's also a producer of other documentaries on horror icons such as His Name Was Jason, 30 Years of Friday the 13th, and Halloween, 25 Years of Terror. He also has some very cool projects that he's working on right now, but I'm going to let him talk to you about that. Anthony, welcome back to the program, my friend.
I love being here. Thanks for having me. I can talk about Scream all night.
Oh, well, we just might do that. Hey, Anthony, why don't you introduce your partner in crime with us tonight?
Yeah, this is Nate Ragan. Go this way. This is Nate Ragan. And Nate Ragan, I actually met during the Still Screaming documentary. So that's how we met back in 2010, 2011. And Nate is also the co-producer of the live events that we did that I've told you guys about in the past, the parties at the Scream House up in Santa Rosa. And so that's Nate. So that's Nate.
That's me. Hey, Nate, glad to have you on Don't Fear the Podcast. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight, man.
Awesome. I can't wait.
So, Nate, are you in the Los Angeles? You're not in the Los Angeles area. You're somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania? Wow. Did you come out for just the event?
Yeah. Yep.
That is a fan, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, can I just say something? It's really weird. Nate and I had never physically met until the Scream party, that night that the party happened. So even through the documentary, all these years we had never physically met. So the day we met was when I picked him up at the airport to go party at the Scream House.
Speaking of Scream, wait, look at it. I got this from you, Anthony.
Yes. No way!
Yep, there we go.
Oh my God, why don't I have mine?
I have so many here.
I know. Hey, Cheeseman, let's look at your shirt real quick. What are you wearing?
I made this myself.
Leave her alone.
Live her alone. Live her alone. I love that.
Classic line from the movie.
Before we
Why they don't make that shirt? That should be on, like, every Scream fan should own that shirt.
I know. Maybe I should come up with a line.
Yeah.
So, Anthony, before we do jump into Scream, what you're working on some cool. You're working on a particular very cool project right now. Is that something you can mention at all?
Yeah, as a matter, we're working with Paramount Pictures on a documentary on the Paranormal Activity movies, and it's very much like Still Screaming, 25 Years of Terror, His Name Was Jason. It's a definitive look at all of the Paranormal Activity movies. There's been 6, and Nate actually here is a co-producer on it. So We're going to be working together on another really great project. And Nate, why don't you tell them how the project came to be?
So I was introducing my son Channing to the first Paranormal Activity movie. He's 10 and he's like I was as a kid. He loves horror movies, and we watched it together. He loved it, and he always has questions after we watch movies. So he's like, how did they make this happen? How did they make stuff for the movie? And I was like, I have no idea. Like every question he asked, I'm like, I don't know. There's no bonus features for these movies. None of them. It's like one of the most successful horror franchises in history, and there's no bonus features. So that night I called Anthony and was like, we need to make a documentary about Paranormal Activity and the making of, because there's no bonus features. And he didn't believe me. He's like, there has to be bonus features.
That's true. Yeah. So if it wasn't for Channing, this would not be happening.
Right.
Now, is it correct? The very first Paranormal Activity, that's the one that was super low budget. Is it like somewhere between $15,000 to $20,000?
$15,000, and it made $193 million.
And isn't that the movie basically that launched Blumhouse?
Yeah. That's the movie.
That's awesome.
Like, Nightmare on Elm Street, built New Line Cinema. It's the exact same thing. Mm. The success, think about that. $15,000 and it makes $193 million. That's the every filmmaker's dream, and there was no studio involved. So the story is fascinating, but then how all the other movies got made. If you're a filmmaker, you're going to love the documentary because it's a really interesting filmmaking journey. So unlikely for a studio, and so that's what we're working on now. So we just signed the deal with Paramount, and we're off and running. So we've done all the interviews. We're just literally, editing at this point. So we're just in post now.
And if people want to find out more about this, I noticed that you are kind of keeping people abreast of it on social media, right?
Yeah, I mentioned it because it was official, but I think the studio's sending out a press release at some point. And the new movie's coming out. So Paranormal Activity 7 is coming, and they want to time it so that the documentary comes out to, re-engage fans and looking back at the previous 6 movies and then looking forward to the new movie. And so it's kind of, they're using it as part of a promotion.
Cool.
Of the new movie. So.
Well, let's dive into another franchise, which is really a franchise which I believe changed horror movies probably forever in some great ways. A year after the murder of her mother, a teenage girl is terrorized by a new killer who targets the girl and her friends by using horror films as part of a deadly game, the killer known as Ghostface. Of course, we are talking about Scream, the very first movie, Scream, directed by the legendary Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson, came out in 1996. Hey, guys, we're going to kind of walk through it a little bit, talk about the characters, but if you can just kind of lay the groundwork for us about how Scream kind of hit and was just so fresh and so new, and it just surprised everybody. Can Anthony or Nate...
I did the documentary, but even though I did the documentary, Nate's more knowledgeable on Scream. Then I don't know what it is. He retains it better, but go ahead, Nate.
What was the reception?
Yeah. So, where'd you like me to begin?
Let's just start the beginning. When it landed, nobody expected a film like this, and for the most part, isn't it true that horror movies were kind of in a slump, especially slasher films, which had kind of been out of vogue for quite some time?
Yeah, and there really wasn't. A lot of people kind of falsely say, there were all these slasher movies being made at the time, but they just weren't any good. And then Scream came along. There really wasn't slasher movies being made anymore. And Scream really did kind of bring it back and revitalize it for the 90s and kind of resurrected the horror genre in general, not just slasher movies. And it spoke. Scream was that movie that when it came out, people that didn't like horror watched Scream and loved it and talked about it. That's how you kind of knew that this was kind of a game changer, in my opinion. When you have people that admittedly, I don't watch horror, I don't like scary movies, but I saw Scream and I loved Scream. That this doesn't happen that often.
But you say it was a game changer. What was the game changer? What was different about Scream?
I think the thing that really set it aside other films like that, other slasher movies, was it felt like it took place in reality, because it was the first time that a movie like that had characters that were actually talking about real movies that were real slasher movies that existed. So it made it feel like all these slasher movies that us horror fans had seen and grown up, that they exist in this universe because they're just movies, but this is real. This is actually happening. And it made it feel like you could identify with so many of the characters in that film because there was so much really realistic dialogue. I mean, that's how my friends and I, that's what we talked about. We talked about horror movies and movies in general.
Now, I think
what was your experience seeing it for the first time?
I saw it. I did see it in theaters. It wasn't on opening night. It had been out for a couple weeks, I think, and I had meant to see it, obviously, eventually, but it just kind of it was very buzzy. I mean, this was before the internet, but just people were talking about it, and there were commercials saying how much money it was making, and I was I have to see this one in theaters. So I actually went by myself. I didn't even go with anybody because we had a theater uptown at the time you could just walk to, which is unheard of now. and I went by myself and saw it and just thought it was just amazing.
Hey, I think this is the best time, as good a time as any, just to, if you are watching this podcast and listening to it, we will have spoilers. We are going to talk spoilers while we talk about it. So if you've not yet watched Scream, we encourage you to go watch it in parts 2 and parts 3 as well. And then come back and listen to us, because we're going to be talking, we're going to have a lot of fun with this. All right. And we'll be going back and forth with this. We're going to kind of let you guys kind of walk us through. First of all, let's talk about, I am wearing my I Love 80s Horror hat. This movie was born out of the tropes of the 80s, or 70s even, the late 70s and the 80s. Horror movies, can we talk a little bit about where horror movies had been and what Scream built on? Where were we? What's the state of horror movies before this came out?
Well, I mean, we're in the middle of the 90s, and so the heyday of modern horror started with Halloween in 1978. So we were immediately bombarded with hundreds of movies that studios embraced, and like the first 7 Friday the 13th movies were made in like 8 years, so the studios embraced the horror movie. I don't know how proud they were of them, but audiences were coming to see them, and they were making millions and millions of dollars. So by the end of the 80s, I think people were exhausted with slashers and serial killers and gratuitous blood, and like every story had been exploited and every holiday had been exploited up until that point. So I think what happened was in the early 90s, it just sort of died because the appetite for that kind of movie was gone. I mean, it was saturated. It was just too much. And so what Scream did was, it not only was innovative, like in its approach, it tipped its hat to all those movies that we were kind of tired of, but we knew about. So we knew the tropes going into Scream, and Kevin Williamson, the writer, to his credit, he knows that. And he knows that we had just gotten out of an era that was built on oceans of horror movies. So even if you're not a huge horror movie, like horror buff, like we are, you still know that the Virgin lives, and if you go upstairs because there's a noise, you're going to die. So these things were kind of universally understood. And so Scream did a really great thing by honoring all of those movies, tipping its hat to it and being so self-referential, but also it did new things that brought back horror, because I think people now saw the potential of horror being smarter and more fun and not so one note and unpredictable, because the ending of Scream, I don't think anyone saw coming.
Nope.
And so the hardest thing in a horror movie is to deliver your ending. They almost always fall apart at the end. And Scream just kind of kicked up 5 notches, 10 notches because of that. It was so great. So I think for all those reasons, it was a stroke of genius. And I have never met Kevin in all my Scream travels. I never met him. But my understanding is that he wrote the script very quickly. He was very inspired because of something a friend said to him, and he wrote it quickly. And I think it just came out, and it just had a very quick trajectory because of that. It was smart. That was what it was doing different. It was a very smart movie.
Now, had there been 2 killers before that in a movie, or is that kind of like the big new thing? Spoiler, that was kind of like the Scream thing kind of brought on.
I honestly don't remember. Nate, can you think of any other movies that had 2?
I don't want to say that there was, but I can say that I don't remember any either.
Yeah.
That's cool. And can we also, that was a great question. The director, Wes Craven, because somebody pointed out, or I was listening to it, Scream was a monumental movie. He had 2 other movies in 2 different decades. Like he basically spent 3 different decades landing 3 big films. In the 70s, is it The Hills Have Eyes?
Yeah.
And then of course in the 80s,
Freddy Krueger. Yep.
Yeah, Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street, and then he reinvented himself again, or reinvented horror again. I mean, is there any?
He didn't want to direct Scream. That's the thing. He turned it down, which understandably so. It's like another one of these. Wes, if he were around, he would say the same thing. He'd say, "Why do I want to keep doing this? And I want to do something else." And he did a movie with Meryl Streep. He was not just setting out to be this slasher, one-off slasher. He wanted to create a catalog of films in different genres and everything. So he turned it down.
I didn't know that. Well, how'd they get him to take it back? Or just money?
It's all in my documentary, still screaming. So
It was probably, let me dress like Freddy as a janitor and I'll do it.
Right. Exactly.
Hey, how can people see your documentary?
That's a good question. It came out on Blu-ray in 2011 with the trilogy, and then if you didn't buy it, then it died. The company that Miramax owns it, they never distributed it on any digital platform. So now Paramount is now distributing the same set, 3 movies, even though there's 4, and it's going to be on there. So yeah, it's just one of those things that, and it was on YouTube for years, and I finally found it, and it had like 1 million hits or something.
Oh,
so
nice.
I pulled that off because I'm not making any money, man. I'm sorry. I had a friend that was so mad at me, and he's like, "That's how I watched it for years," and I was like, "Not anymore."
I think that new box set, by the way, comes out on the 13th.
Okay. So there's a new box set of Scream movies, and it's going to be on there, and that's how people can see it. So
did you say it's only going to be the first 3 though?
Yeah, it doesn't include part 4.
Why is that?
Well, it's a different studio. When they made part 4, there was another company that was involved.
The Weinstein company did 4.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, that's the problem.
Do you think they'll ignore that for the new movies they're doing?
Wrapped up.
I don't know. I don't think they're ignoring the 4th movie or any of the storyline. I think it's a continuation. That's what you've heard, right, Nate?
Yeah, it's definitely a continuation of the first 4.
Okay.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, let's talk about the first one. Okay, we talked about Wes Craven. I did not know that he was. I'm not aware of his outside the horror. You've got a guest with you, Anthony.
This is my cat.
Yeah.
This is my cat, Lester.
It's Lester from Halloween.
He loves being on
He is
camera.
named after the dog in Halloween.
That's great.
They hate that
This big
mask.
Scream bobblehead is doing here. So
Can we talk about and then Luke's going to kind of walk us through with you guys the characters. The writer Kevin Williamson. Was this his first horror, or because what else was he known for? Because this is a super smart film. He's known for writing smart teens. What else was it he was known for? Was it? He's the Dawson's Creek guy, right?
Yeah.
yeah. This is his first movie. This is his very first thing. Yeah, he struck gold.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we interviewed Kathy Conrad, which is the producer that discovered the script. And she said when she got the script and she was reading it, she just was like, I need to get this over to the Weinsteins immediately. She had she was a producer and everything. And she literally just picked up the phone and said, you got to do this. And it was as fast as that. It was just, he got a deal. And that's a 1 in a million. Most people don't have that experience. So he struck gold for sure. And look at the career he's had. I mean, incredible.
I know.
That cat almost knocked the Scream mask over. That was awesome.
One time I was doing a podcast. I was hosting a podcast, and I had the same bobblehead like in the corner. He jumped on it, and the whole thing crashed. So I'm just waiting for that to happen again.
Well,
We have done scare pranks on our show before, so we don't mind things going crazy.
Well, I'm going to start with the first cast member, and we're going to kind of just talk. Let's just talk through some of the cast that we had in the film and why it was like their roles were significant. And then Luke, if you can go ahead after I'm going to start.
Okay.
This was perhaps this is the scene that started it all. Can we talk about the fact that Drew Barrymore, right on the poster, everybody thought before they saw this was a Drew Barrymore film, a starring vehicle for Drew Barrymore. Can you guys talk about how this first 12 to 15 minutes of Scream basically is probably some of the most famous 12 to 15 minutes in all of horror movie history?
Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah. So she originally was going to be cast to play Sydney. And then she kind of decided that she would rather be killed in the opening scene because no one would see it coming, which obviously was absolutely correct. I remember seeing it the first time thinking that she was more than likely going to be the main character just because it's Drew Barrymore.
Yeah.
Just the whole scene just kind of threw everybody for a loop because they were like, holy shit, they're killing like the star in the first 15 minutes, like what else? Like all bets are off. Like the whole anything can happen in this movie.
Kind of reminds you a little bit of Psycho.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Luke.
Now, what about Sydney? Did they have like other people in mind before they got Neve Campbell, or what was the process of kind of getting her and kind of working with her on that?
I know she wasn't like first. There was a lot of people that auditioned. There were so many. I'm trying to think. I can't think of some of the names, but the one girl that ended up being an urban legend, like years later, she had originally like auditioned for the role of Sydney. But yeah, obviously Neve wanted out because Wes just thought she was perfect for the role.
Can't imagine anybody else playing Sydney right now.
Yeah, she did so perfectly.
It's you think of her, and it just can't be anyone else. Like in your head, you know.
Anthony, did you guys interview Neve?
Yeah, we did. We interviewed. Well, I actually didn't interview her because she was in the UK when we needed the interview, and she was not able to get here. So I hired a company, and this. I always thought this was interesting. I didn't know that the company I hired was going to do the interview on a boat. so they asked Sydney. They asked Neve to go do her interview, and she's on a pier and she's walking onto this boat. And I got the footage. So they still didn't even tell me. And I got the footage and I'm watching it and she's clearly sitting like in the hull of like this boat. And I'm like, there's like clearly an engine behind her. And I'm like, where did they film this? And then the guy said, oh yeah, we have like a little studio or studios on a boat. And I was like, you could have told me that. Like, as a producer, you don't expect that. You don't have to clarify. Are you sure you're not shooting, on a high wire or on a boat or something? Like it was just the weirdest thing. But no, I never met her either to this day. But she was really great. She did such a good interview, and she's very proud of the Scream movies.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Was how does she feel about her body of work with the Scream films?
Well, she's been in every movie. She does a lot of conventions, and she's done interviews for Scream. And so I think, just in general, I think she's very proud. Very proud of them. And wouldn't you be? I mean, but there are some actors that sort of, well, I don't do horror anymore. There's that kind of actor, but I don't think she's like that at all. She's done a whole bunch of stuff, and she's doing the new movie, so she's got to be proud of it. Yeah,
that's awesome.
But there's a certain actor of that, like, if we're talking about grabbing the zeitgeist of the time, here's Courtney Cox as Gale Weathers. You couldn't have picked this one better. Can you talk about how they got her and what's her feelings towards the films?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure that she did audition. She was looking to do another feature film at the time. And I can't remember the story. There is a story about how the script got to her. But I believe, in general, she was just looking to do another feature film. And they just thought she was perfect for the role. To my knowledge, she's, proud of the films. I think they're a little, I don't know that she necessarily likes to talk about them a lot just because of, it's where she met her husband, who's no longer her husband. And you kind of follow the ups and downs of the relationship from movie to movie. So I think that's one reason why she doesn't discuss them a lot, but it's a little bit different for her, I think.
Yeah. Speaking of which, David Arquette. Boy, he exploded on the scene after this. He's great. He's even got a new series out right now. What's it? Killing David Arquette or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyways, his character and Gale's character were great together. But I guess, but there's one particular character I'm going to grab, and then I'm going to let Luke finish up real quick. There's one pivotal character that basically is the heart and soul of Scream, Randy. Because without Randy, we don't have the rules. So can you talk about how important Randy's character is to the first three films especially?
Yeah, Randy was the audience, and we all understood what he was saying when he goes, if we all watch Prom Night, we just save time. And it was like, we got it. We got what Scream was about. And when he said that, and he was just such a perfectly written character. And I also think it was his first movie, if I'm not mistaken. I remember him saying that when he showed up to set, he was just rehearsing, memorizing his lines in his hotel room. And like, he was just so deathly afraid of forgetting his lines. And so he was just rehearsing and memorizing. But also you believed him too. I think in horror movies in general, if the right actor isn't in the role and you just don't believe them, it doesn't help the movie at all. And there's a lot of actors in those roles in horror movies. It's like, if you just had a better actor. And the thing about this movie is that everybody was amazing. It's like the cast of Friends, it's like they just happened to cast all these amazing people. And I think Scream is filled with a cast like that. Going back to Dewey and, that character, I don't know if, I just couldn't relate to the character. He was just so he was so quirky and silly and goofy. And the movie Scary Movie where they created Doofy, which was that's how I always saw that character. For some reason it worked. The innocence, it somehow worked. So again, credit to Kevin, because he wrote a character, I think, that was very memorable, that wasn't obvious. The obvious thing would be to write some cop that's like, that has no depth, nothing interesting about them, and he did. And because of David's just sort of natural quirkiness and everything, they just cast him in the right role. It all just worked. So there's no one in the series that was miscast, in the first movie I'm talking about.
Yeah, I love how he'd get scared, or I love how when his sister kind of made fun of him, he's like, "You treat me like an officer of the law." He always got emotional. So it was just funny to see, because he'd do brave things as a cop would, but he'd react like the audience would and still jump, still get scared. The mask is like, ah, and then freaks out when the door opens and everything.
And then you love him. But then you love the guy,
Yeah.
And so it's another hurdle every character goes through in a horror movie. It's like, if we just don't care about you, it's like your fault as a filmmaker. You need to make us care. So by the end, you're kind of you're definitely rooting for him,
He's got that Keanu Reeves disease where you don't age too much. He seemed to has aged, he doesn't look too much different. So when they do it again, it's like how many years have passed? What's crazier is back when they filmed it, Drew Barrymore was closer age of E.T. than it is from when they first filmed it till now, by several years.
Oh my!
It's just crazy to think how long ago that movie was now.
Yeah.
But we can't not speak of the two killers from the movie. So saving the best for last, casting of Skeet Ulrich and Matthew Lillard as Billy and Stu. Amazing characters. What can you tell us about that?
Lightning
up first.
Yeah.
I think that, like you said, I think it's perfect casting. I know that, Skeet was selected because Wes's daughter was kind of saying oh no, you got to cast him. He's really good looking. And, obviously everybody made the comparison that he kind of looked and acted a little bit like Johnny Depp, and, that Wes kind of discovered Johnny Depp and gave him a career, as Johnny Depp still says till this day. And he kind of did the same for Skeet. And I do know that for the audition that Skeet had to read lines as the killer, because obviously at the time it wasn't this, everything has to be a big secret. So everybody knew, they got the whole script, they knew who the killer was. So it's really important that they got whoever was cast as Billy and Stu could pull off innocent boyfriend that maybe is a killer, and then could obviously follow through at the end and actually be the killer and be terrifying, which I thought Skeet was amazing as just this cold, calculated psycho that planned this whole thing out. And Matthew, of course, I'll let Anthony talk about Matthew, because I know he really loves his performance in that.
Yeah, well, Matthew Lillard, if you watch that ending scene, I don't know how he pulled it off so beautifully. And it's easy to go over the top crazy, and we've seen those performances in horror movies where it's just they're playing crazy, and it's not working. There's something about it, but there's something about the balance he found. I don't know how he did it, but he's so hyper crazy. And you see it behind his. I mean, I have such respect for actors that can do that. I've always said if I ever, I've met Matthew before, and I don't know if I've actually said this to him, but it's an Academy Award-winning performance. It really is, and I don't know what else you have to do as an actor to achieve that award than what he did at the end of that movie. I mean, Skeet too is amazing. They're all amazing, but Matthew, man, there are some scenes in there. I remember when he says, I'm feeling a little woozy here, like the entire audience, like they loved him. They not that they hated him, but clearly he was one of the killers. Clearly he's the bad guy, but he just wrapped you around his finger. And I always, whenever I watch the movie, I can't wait for that scene because it's so great.
It's great because he's like drooling on himself, basically spitting, and he just has so big like with the performance. Stop hitting with the phone, you dick.
Right. When he says like, "Let's face it, Sid, your mother ain't Sharon Stone," and it's like funny,
like, kind of like the comic relief and the killer at the same time, kind of like a little bit of Freddy in there.
Yeah. It was just such a big surprise because you don't normally get that great of an ending in a horror movie. You just don't. And so not only were we convinced or believed that there were two people, of course it made perfect sense when you see them together, but then they delivered a really incredible ending. So, one of the best endings ever. I remember when I saw it in theaters, when that movie was over, I was like, horror is back, and it just was a great day when I saw that movie. I was like, yes.
Yeah, you definitely would have thought of him as the killer too, because like with his personality, he seems like the douchebag guy that would get killed.
Yeah.
There is one. We're just talking about the end of. If we're talking about the end of the movie, we'll jump there. Just as far as a character, there's a certain character that was towards the end of the movie that we can't forget about. The house. No, really. One of the best horror movies have memorable settings, and I know that you guys have been here to the house. So this is a crazy cool setting. Can you talk about the setting for the third act and why it was so effective?
Yeah, I mean, I look at that picture and I'm flooded with great memories of the parties we've had there. So I think a lot of people don't know how big the house is. It's big, like they show obviously this angle of the house in the movie, but it's a 62 or 6,500 square foot home. It's enormous, and so they kind of cheated in the movie a little bit. Where you think the living room is, it's really a dining room, and but people don't realize how big the house is. But, you needed it to be big because he's chasing her around, and then Tatum gets killed in the garage, and you needed that space to, couldn't be a little Michael Myers, house. It had to be a big house where everyone was coming to party. But it's also on a compound. There's actually on that property behind a fence are 3 houses and 2 barns, and this house sits on a hill, like way in the back. So they were isolated, and we watched the movie. It doesn't really look like that, but there's nothing else around it. Like Nightmare on Elm Street, you've got that house in the middle of a row of houses. Right. Not this house. It's really on a compound, which is why we did the parties, because you could just close the gate and have a big old party, and no one would know you were there. So, and especially when the fog descended, everything was beautiful. But the house was a character in itself. Yeah.
Yeah, did you blast the soundtrack to the movie while you're in the house?
100%.
Yes. Was it Bird Brains, Youth of America? Yeah. And it's so cool when we all did it. Whenever the Youth of America came on, you'd go outside and you'd walk into the
for the Youth of America.
I think we played that song 100 times.
Yeah, I would. That would just be on repeat the whole time.
We do have real quick. There's 2 last characters. One, seen here with Matthew Lillard, Rose McGowan as Tatum. What do you guys know about her character? Rose McGowan, was she in Charmed at the time when this was filming? Or I don't remember, because this was definitely, a lot of people call it the WB era of horror movies. The Warner Brothers TV shows were filling up, this and Urban Legends, Final Destination. I Know You Did Last Summer. It had all the WB stars on, especially Scream kind of started that. And I guess Rose kind of continued that tradition. She was one of the most memorable deaths in the movie, that's for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I only remember interviewing her for the documentary, and she's very proud of Scream as well. And she was so nice. And but yeah, I don't know if she was on. I don't know if she was on Charmed at the same time or whatever. But yeah, she was another great character, and like everybody remembers that. It's one of the best deaths in the series. I honestly don't know if it's possible what happened to her. Like, I don't know if it's possible to get killed through a dog. I don't know if that's even possible, but it made for a great scene, you know. Yeah. And when we were at the house, the Scream Comes Home party that we had, Nate and I came this close to asking the homeowners to put the doggy door back just so that we could like have fun crawling through the doggy door. But they didn't do it. So
we still have to make that happen someday.
You just threw bottles of beer at each other in the garage instead.
Okay, one last character before we're going to jump a little bit into the plot. We have to talk about this particular character, Ghostface himself. The character, what a stinking memorable killer. Can you guys talk about like what set this guy apart from what had preceded him, the killers that came before?
Falling, running into things, no coordination or athleticism.
Total klutz, yeah. He knows everything. That's one of the things that I leaned on when I was doing the documentary was his knowledge of the masks and all of that. So Nate is like an expert.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like the first thing that sets him aside. I mean, you got other characters that kind of toyed with their victims. You know, Freddy, made like the one-liners and the wisecracks. But, this was the first time that you really saw where it was memorable that a killer was using technology to his advantage with the phone calls. And of course, he's quizzing these people on movies that they're real movies, like I said before this, movies didn't really do that, especially horror movies. So he's asking them questions that we as the audience, as horror movie fans, we know the answers to these questions. So you're like screaming back and saying like, no, it's this. So there was that. And then, it's not the first slasher where, that's kind of like what slashers are, is like, who is the killer? But it just seems so outlandish, and it was so scary in the first film when the first time you see him, because you're like, oh my God, this is literally a person wearing like a Halloween costume and a mask, like slaughtering teenagers. It was so realistic and scary.
Mm-hmm. The thing, the
Ghostface versus Jason, if there was ever a movie, I mean, who would win?
Well, the thing about it, though, you talked about how it was kind of like trying to figure out who the killer was. For like, that is something that we hadn't seen probably since the first Friday the 13th. Like, because Friday the 13th Part 2, well, Part 5,
yeah.
But Part 2 on, we know who the killer is. Halloween, we know who the killer is. This one, it was like, who's the killer? And that was kind of a cool thing. The whole
whodunit.
Yeah, the whodunit.
Yeah, I think the inherent problem with whodunits is if you don't care who done it, it doesn't land. It's just like, well, we know it's one of these people, and there are so many horror movies and movies like that where it's like the mask comes off and you're like, oh, it was Johnny, or like, but it was these two guys. It mattered. It meant something, and I think you could clearly see the relationship. Like Stu is clearly the sidekick, to the brains who was Skeet. And they established that relationship too. There was talk about them being like a homosexual couple, and it was like, I didn't even see that, like watching the movie, and but then when you think about it, you're like, well, what was the connection? What? And I don't think Kevin Williamson wrote that in there, but it's like there clearly was a relationship, and even when they're stabbing each other, there's an affinity to it. It's not like they're trying to kill each other. Like, well, now that the plot is revealed, I'm going to kill you and run away with the money. It's not that. It's like clearly there's like they like each other. They love what they're doing. They're obsessed with horror movies. So they had their own relationship. So when it was revealed that it was both of them, they still managed to clarify that. They did so much in that last scene that was so genius.
Mm-hmm.
Blood everywhere too.
That was one of the bloodiest scenes. I tell you what, because the movie itself, it did have some pretty gory spot. Well, Drew Barrymore's death at the beginning is perhaps, I think, the goriest of the first film. But yeah, but they did, the two killers at the end, they did have a level of affection for each other that, you never know what that's about. It didn't necessarily mean they were a gay couple. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but they definitely, they did have some affection, some brotherly love towards one another.
Yeah.
Hey, Luke, did you have a question?
Well, I mean, with that, he rested his head on his shoulder. They were close buddies, and I do think Billy was kind of the crazier of the two, though, because he seemed like he kind of like without Billy, I don't know if Stu would have done this whole thing. And what was Billy's motive?
Yeah,
I don't really know what Stu's motive was, other than he was just big, crazy. I don't know.
Yeah, they weren't the same. They had their own personalities, and that's the writing.
Can we talk about? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that it was a beautiful reveal, and you bought it, and it was that's like. I think a lot of people in general, if you're not a big horror movie fan, you think horror movies are easy, right? You just put a bunch of kids in a house and someone kills them. Well, that's not how you make a horror movie. Maybe that there was a couple years of that and fine. But, today we're looking at very smart horror. And I think Scream, people have to credit it for being intelligent and smart and thoughtful and elevated horror. And it is a horror movie. It's a slasher movie. They build it as a thriller, and it's like Wes Craven's new Thriller, but it's a horror movie. It's a slasher movie. Yeah.
You're talking about motivations for killing. What, and I might just be missing it, what was the reason they killed Rose McGowan's character, Tatum? What was the reason for her death?
Do you know, Nate?
Well, I know that, like, I can tell you fan theories.
Yeah.
Fan theories were that Stu, like, there was somebody else he was interested in, so he just kind of wanted to knock her off and get rid of her. That maybe she had cheated on him at one point, and he knew about it. So there was theories, but they never really say. But I guess honestly, me personally, I always look at it as like, why not? We're killing all of our friends anyways, so hey, why not?
I think they were achieving what horror movies did, and also they're killing their target's friend. So they're just making her world more awful by killing her friend. That's what you do in horror movies. You kill people, and that's enough of a reason for me. You need body count in a horror movie, and they didn't plan for. There's no way they could have planned for Sydney to see her in that position, jumping out the window and all that. But she did, and if they knew that, they probably would have been thrilled. Right. They made her suffer by killing her friend.
Well, I think you got it right there. I think the reason she got killed is I think they were using her friendship with Sydney to stay close to Sydney. So if they kind of had this little couple dynamic, then they could kind of keep eyes and keep kind of close in the whole thing. So maybe Stu never was really that into her, but it seemed like he was kind of into Casey because he went out with her and then she dumped him for Steve and all that. So he may have the whole time kind of like Steve, and just was pissed off. So he killed both of them and then kind of used the other character just to get close to Sydney. So I would think more of that based on what the movie kind of set up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to move on and talk about part 2 and part 3 here, since it's the Scream trilogy, not quite as deep. But to sum up part 1, it was new, it was fresh, but it was super funny. Did you ever? Some people have said that maybe sometimes some of the humor might have gotten in front or in the way of some of the horror. Did you ever feel that?
No, not at all.
No, I thought the first one. Well, I guess I know we're getting ready to get into 2, but I think the first one and the second one, even though the second one's not quite as humorous as the first, but I felt like the first and the second are the only ones in the series so far that balance the humor and the horror like absolutely perfectly. Yeah. I just thought, they did it right, and I think that's what the later ones were missing.
I think the second one, and we can go ahead and move into that. And feel free to jump back to the first one because that one's just the classic. It's on the pedestal, and we will always keep it there. But the second one that I really liked was how meta it went. Like, it was a movie within the movie. They were watching the movie Stab, which was about what the occurrences of Scream. But can you talk a little bit about how smart the writer had to be to actually balance the two, the movie within the movies, keeping the humor, keeping like the tropes of horror movies, but really putting it on a screen and a screen. I'm getting all making. I'm not even drinking.
Well, I think it's a good and a bad thing in my opinion, because we're going to be talking a little bit about Scream 3 too. But I think by Scream 3 it was so off the rails, so self-referential. So for Scream 2 it was still a good balance. But I think people wanted that. They wanted to see this. It was how aware it was of itself and the self-referential elements in it. And so I think it was just fun. And, horror movies weren't doing that. So it's built in. It's a trope in the Scream movies. I think they handled it really well. For that movie, I loved it. Scream 2 is a great film, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But it didn't get in the way. In horror movies, I always say, if it's too plotty, if there's too much going on, it takes away from the breathability factor in a horror movie, where you have to give your audience time to not think so that they become emotionally involved. It's you can't have too much explaining to do. And Scream somehow is so full of story and all of that, and it still achieves the goal of scaring you and everything. So yeah. Scream, I think, was very plot heavy as well. I don't think it's as good as the first movie, but I give it an A for sure.
I'd give it an A, especially let's talk, because we've talked about how iconic the Drew Barrymore scene to open the movie was. So in part 2, they felt they had to go a little bit bigger perhaps, and they got Jada Pinkett Smith to play Maureen. Walk us through that opening scene and how it kind of landed with a giant, we're back.
I think at that point, it's kind of, they were up to it. They kind of had a challenge on their hands, which was, and I don't know that necessarily they saw this coming, but when it was as successful as it was, the original, and it got greenlit for a sequel almost immediately, they kind of knew now there's an expectation for what we're doing. And I think one of those expectations was, I think they realized early on that okay, one of Scream's, the thing with Scream, aside from it being a whodunit, is you have to have a crazy knockout opening scene where people get killed, and it has to be big name stars. Mm-hmm. So I think they really smartly figured that out, and it kind of became a thing that's lasted throughout the series of, we really have to knock it out of the park with the opening, and throw the audience for a loop right off the bat. And I think the second one did it brilliantly, not even so much with the stars right away, but once you realized they're going to see, like you said, they're going to see a movie based on the original movie. And as you said, again, it's so meta. I think that was the big knockout thing. Was who would have thought that was what the opening of Scream 2 would be? People going to a movie theater to basically watch Scream, more or less, and get killed.
And then it's a filmmaker and writer, they kind of tell you to keep the press out sometimes, because it will ruin a movie. Friday the 13th, they don't bring all the press in, and then it's all around the world. But with Scream, and with them doing Gale Weathers in the first one, of course people would hear about this, and of course they're wearing these masks, and then people, how people are a big fan of crime dramas and all that. Of course people would get kind of into it, and maybe a movie would get made of it, like they've been doing with the Ted Bundy stuff and everything. So it was really smart how they kind of did tie in, something happens in this town, and then the world knows about it, and almost kind of becomes its own big thing. So that was really creative, how they did kind of the beginning of that. There was almost fans of the first film and within the film or something.
Yeah.
How about we compare the opening of part 2 to the opening of part 3? And I personally am not the biggest fan of the opening of part 3.
Yeah.
Can you explain to me why I might feel that way? Because
well, it's the opening, when compared to part 1, how do you achieve that same opening? It's you just can't. So, and they did a great job in 2, although I love 1 more. But I just think by part 3, you're setting up something that can't be achieved.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just why, and and I feel the same way. I don't know why the opening wasn't as compelling. It could have been, but I think the movie part 3 overall, in my opinion, was so derivative of its awareness, and they had the real Gale Weathers and then the actor Gale Weathers, and then they had actors playing and it was just it got off. It just went in a direction that was like very Scooby-Doo, cheesy, and I don't know why they did that, because the other movies weren't really like that. There's a lot of humor and stuff, but like when you have Parker Posey, I love Parker Posey to death.
Yeah.
But like when you have a character acting the way she's acting in the movie, it's like a caricature and it's more silly. So I think part 3, I know, look, I will love all the Scream movies till I die, but I think it kind of was a failure in a way, although there are some things I do like about the film.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't dislike the opening of 3. I think they did one thing right, which was, I know Cotton Weary, he wasn't necessarily, you know, the core cast that survived the first 2. It's always going to be, you know, Sidney, Dewey, Gale. But, you know, Cotton was in the first one. He was also in the second one, and he survived. So he was kind of like part of that group. Mm-hmm. And I think the one thing they did correctly was to kind of say, well, we got to kill somebody. Like, they all 4 can't survive again. So I think that was kind of the card that they pulled for the opening scene of 3, was like, we're going to kill off one of the main characters. And I think it was the right choice. Obviously, I'm glad it didn't kill any of the original 3, but I thought it was also the right choice because, you know, Cotton was that one that was in fans' minds, in the back of their head, they were always like, dude, he's going to be the killer. Like, totally. He's going to be the killer in 3. He has to be. Then he dies in the opening scene, and it's like, okay, we were wrong. But yeah, I agree with Anthony on everything as far as, you know, I think it was missing Kevin Williamson. I mean, obviously he didn't read the script. And I think he's the one that's able to get that perfect balance of horror and comedy. And when you bring in other writers, not to talk down on the other writers, right, but I think they're just not able to replicate what Kevin's able to do. So you kind of end up with what Scream 3 was, which was too much comedy and not enough horror, and it just didn't work the way that the other 2 did. Yeah,
and it's kind of like what you said, Anthony. A lot of people think that horror movies are easy. You just put kids in a house. But Kevin Williams, I mean, his script demonstrated, the smart, the funny, the scary. That was a hard combination to fit. It's the perfect mix. So, and we don't have a whole lot of time left here, so we're going to kind of like zoom over a little bit. But what did you guys think about the outcome of Scream 2 and the outcome of Scream 3? How do you think about the 2 movies in general?
What do you mean by the outcome? Just the reception?
Yeah, I'm sorry, just how they turned out.
How they did, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were. I saw all the movies opening night. I remembered being disappointed with part 3. For me, I was just disappointed, and I think the problem with that movie that I think over time people have noticed too is that they saved this huge story for a reveal in an ending scene. Yeah, you know, I think when you structure a story like that in a horror movie, where you kind of can't reveal anything until the mask comes off, you know, and you realize who's under the mask and why, and it becomes that Scooby-Doo thing, and so I think that was the general reception, and I think a lot of people thought Scream was dead after part 3. Mm-hmm. I thought it was like, well, it's done. The self-referential thing is dead. And so just like in the early 90s when horror had died, it was kind of like when Scream 3 came out, it was like, okay, are we done with horror again? Because it's not scary anymore and it's getting silly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know you guys aren't talking about Scream 4, but I was surprised when they announced Scream 4. I was like, what? No way.
No, go ahead and mention that. What do you think about Scream 4?
You know, I didn't like it when I first saw it. I remember I went to the premiere, and that's when our documentary came out, so we got to go to the premiere. And I remember going like, I don't know if I like it or not. You know, the general idea of like someone exploiting a trauma elsewhere in the family for fame, to me felt like on the nose. It was like Scream did it. It hit it on the nose. It's talking about today. It's establishing the new rules. But it didn't really land for me. But then over the years, I've come to really love it. And I've seen it a million times. And I just can't stand Hayden Panettiere's hair. But aside from that, I think the movie is really great.
Courtney Cox's hair in part 2. Oh my God.
That is why they did that. I have no idea. It was like she even says that. She just tweets on it going, how did the people let this happen to me? It's the worst hair in the world.
Now, did you guys hear? I've heard it rumored that, like, for some reason they thought about bringing Stu back at one point for, I don't know, like 3 or 4. Is that true, or is that just something?
Nate and I were just talking about that, right?
Yeah. From what I understand, it's not really true. Basically, the rumor has been for years that, you know, Kevin had an original script for Scream 3 that they didn't use, and they brought in these other writers, and his original script, Stu was behind all of it. From what I understand, the actual truth is that there was never a script by Kevin for 3. He wrote like not even a 1-page. It was like a half-page treatment that basically a lot of the ideas that were in that treatment, he ended up recycling and using in 4 because they didn't use his treatment for 3. His original treatment from 3 was that, you know, Sydney gets attacked in the opening scene, and she appears to be killed. And then we find out part of the way through the movie that she actually was only injured. So she decided to fake her death so that this would never happen to her again. And then the whole Stab 3 thing, which was the only part of his treatment that they used, was that they were filming Stab 3, but they were filming it in Woodsboro. So it wasn't in Hollywood, it was in Woodsboro, and there was the high school. And basically the ending of the film was that the killer was the principal's daughter, and she was like the head of this like film club, and it was like her and all of her friends, like there were like 5 killers, and her motive was that she wanted to be famous. She wanted to be the new final girl and get the fame that Sydney had, and that at the bottom of the treatment, Kevin wrote, like, as a joke, he hand wrote like, maybe Stu's still alive and he's in prison and he's controlling the whole thing. And that's where that like rumor started as far as I know. But I know Matthew had said, and I don't want to say I don't want to take words out of his mouth and say he's wrong, but I know he had said in, you know, the documentary that he was like hired and paid for Scream 3, even though they didn't shoot his scenes. But I've heard that that's not accurate.
But that's how could they bring it? That would be great. Let's bring it back.
It's possible. I mean, it's Scream. They might do it, you know? Do you remember that movie Soap Dish? Did you ever see Soap Dish? Do you remember when like Whoopi Goldberg is playing a writer on a soap opera and the executive is Robert Downey Jr., I think, and he's like, bring that character back in season 2, and she goes, well, he was decapitated, he doesn't have a head, and he goes, well, just bring him back, and she's like, but he doesn't have a head, and he's like, bring him back, and at the end of the scene she's like, but he doesn't have a head, you know, she's going crazy, like, how do I do this? You know, I think they could do that in a Scream movie. They could bring him back, it would all make sense.
Wait, how was he killed? Was it a gunshot to the head, or was he how was he killed?
TV fell in his head.
That's right. That's right.
He could be alive. He could totally be alive.
Yeah.
Hey, so hey, look, do you have any other questions? About
one more thing with that, and this is actually true. He was actually in part 2 as a party extra, Matthew Lillard, because he was dating, I think, Neve Campbell at the time. Like, if you go on YouTube, he's like got blonde hair, like glasses or something, but he's in the background. But for some reason, they let him.
Or Senseless at the time. He was filming that movie Senseless. If you ever saw it, he had like that bleached blonde hair. So I think that's why he had that look. Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy that he had like I never knew that until I like heard it on something, and then I saw it that like he was in the second one just for a split second in the deep background.
So just as we close out, the thing that's interesting is that the influence of the Scream films, like where it came from. I would argue that Scream came from the original Halloween. That Halloween had the biggest influence on Scream, and then Scream then had an influence on H2O. You know, H2O wouldn't have existed the way it existed without Scream. So it's kind of cool the cyclical way that these movies have worked. Can you just talk, if you don't mind, just for a second, about how I don't know, the two movies borrowed and played off each other. Like the Halloween and Scream.
Scream is definitely a big hug to Halloween, and Kevin's even said that, and they show clips of it in the movie, and it's it's almost like if we all know if Halloween didn't exist, Scream wouldn't exist, and so that shows you how meaningful that film was to Scream. But I think in Scream fashion, it's kind of like, well, of course it's going to like reboot Halloween then. So because it tipped its hat to Halloween, now it could be the engine and the fuel that the next Halloween movie, had. And Jamie Lee was completely behind it. She was like, you're going to write it. I'm going to star in it. It's going to be great. And so, I loved that. I think H2O felt like a Scream movie. Even the poster had that floating head thing going on. And like, I love H2O. I love that movie so much, but it did feel a lot very Scream inspired. And if you watch the movie, they lifted music from Scream. There's same tracks they lifted from Scream and put in Halloween H2O. So it also, because of that too, it had the sensibility because of Beltrami's score. Like it was now in H2O. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Also,
whatever they got to do to keep horror alive is great. So
it borrowed from. It took some from Dawson's Creek with Michelle Williams. It had the same feeling. I guess that era of film, I just heard it's the WB era. Scream started it, and then we had a bunch of like derivative types of horror movies that came after that. I know you did last summer, Urban Legend. Even the Final Destination movies a little bit were kind of like that. But I've heard it argued that with the end of Scream 3, possibly Scream 4, that ended that era. And it started with Scream and ended with Scream. That era ended. Would you, that type of movie, which is, the posters with a bunch of teenagers on the front staring at the camera, you could just interchange it with anybody else. It's the same poster,
Exactly. I would go from Scream to Scream 4. I would cap it off at Scream 4. I think that's when sort of I don't know what the word is, but like 90s horror ended, I think, at Scream 4. It had the same arc as 80s horror. It just ended.
Yeah. When did Scream 4
was it the Paranormal, the Scream 4, the Paranormal Activity?
Yeah, Paranormal Activity. Well, it was a new kind of horror movie, right? It was it gave birth to that found footage. It's really not. I hate that term, found footage, because it's surveillance footage. It's not found footage, but that's the genre. But I think people were looking for smarter, and they were tired of the jokes and the self-referential format. So it's not easy to do something original in horror. It's just not. And it's a big task. And so as the years go on, I love the genre more because what's happening now, especially in horror now, like there's some smart movies and so well written and so well directed, and there's so many being made that, when it's done right, and I know that's subjective, and I'm not saying what I love is right and what I hate is wrong, but I think we're in a new era where movies are smart now and independent movies are back. So I think the big studio films are not necessary anymore because you can make a movie. Like Shudder has a whole bunch of them. Summer of '84 was a really good movie.
I love that movie. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was so good.
It's like there's a lot of really smart writing now, and I think we're in a new heyday. So Scream 4 ended, like it ended that era, but now we're in another one, and it follows, and all those movies, just great films. Yeah,
they're calling it prestige horror. Like they're almost prestigious. They're independent. They say something.
Plus, like 2 hours, 3-hour movies, like it, and now they're getting the running times that are unheard of. Like, could you imagine if Valentine came out and it was 3 hours? You'd be like, what the hell? But now they're treated like they're being respected finally after all these years. I mean, the Academy Awards don't have a best horror movie, or, Silence of the Lambs cleaned up a little, but that was a thriller, you know? And I just kind of feel like maybe the respect for the genre and the storytelling and the immense talent that goes into pulling off extraordinary stories that go to dark places, it's like maybe it's getting its respect finally after all these years.
Yeah, I agree. So last couple of questions, and I'd look at it. How is it that of this era, which had I don't like to say snap on it. It's kind of
slow motion on us there for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Like of this era, there was
Say it again.
of this era, there were plenty of movies that tried to be Scream. But Scream of the franchise is the one that stands out. The rest of them, they're decent films, but those aren't the ones we're talking about. Those aren't the ones we remember. That doesn't mean they're bad. What made Scream the movie, this franchise, different and sustainable that the other movies kind of didn't quite get?
Kevin Williamson, the intelligence in that script.
Yep.
Reading that script, I want to hear it. But could you imagine reading Scream and going, "Oh my god!" Like, you know, I wish I read it before I saw the movie, because I think I would have read. I'd be like, "This would make a great movie." You know?
Yeah. What do you think, Nate?
Yeah, I would say, you know, I agree with what Anthony said, but also, you know, extremely memorable characters, which is something that a lot of horror films, they don't have. I don't want to say that, you know, of course there's horror movies with memorable characters, but not the way that Scream has, and, you know, that's carried on through all the films. I mean, even the characters like you don't like there's a lot of people that hated, you know, Parker Posey's character in 3, but they're still talking about her, you know, 20 years later because she's memorable. So I think memorable characters, very memorable scenes that stick out. I think The Mask, you know, it's everywhere. Like, I mean, I have, you know, a million of them everywhere, but, you know, The Mask, they're everywhere. They're every Halloween, you know. Ghostface is just everywhere, whether Scream's like current or popular, or there's a new movie coming or not. And then I like going back to what I said at the beginning, really just, Scream was just one of those like movies that kind of transcended the genre, in the sense that, you know, people who they admittedly do not like horror movies, do not watch horror movies, they all saw Scream when it came out and they all loved it and talked about it. So I think that's one of the main factors that kind of made it as popular as it is, and, you know, it's still talked about.
Yep. So as we kind of wind down here, I've got to ask you though, like we've talked about Scream 1, 2, 3, 4. It was announced. It's been announced. The original cast, they are coming back. Well, the surviving cast is coming back for Scream 5, and I think Scream 6. They announced a 6.
So I didn't hear that. What do you know?
Luke, I think
it was probably Brad or something that's like they already signed on for 2, or I don't know.
Somebody said they already signed on for 6. I don't believe me. I may be telling you I'm telling you a lie right now. For Scream 5, I just want to know, what do you know? What do you hope? What do you think? Where do you think we're going with the film? How can it, or with the series, how can it keep going? How can it stay great? And will Nev Campbell live more than 12 minutes into the film?
Well, I mean, I can only tell you my own personal thoughts, which was, you know, when I first heard that there was just going to be another Scream film, not that I didn't want it, but I was just like, why? Like, how can they do one without Wes Craven?
Yeah.
And I remember racking my brain, like, there's nobody. There's literally nobody. I could think there's nobody that could handle a Scream movie or could direct a Scream movie. It's just not possible. They should just leave it alone. And I was actually in the airport going to the second party that we did at the house. If you remember, Anthony, that's when they announced that it was definitely happening, who the directors were. And I remember it coming across like my phone. It was like Ready or Not directors directing Scream 5. And I remember just instantly being like, oh my gosh, that's going to work. Like, I really, truly believe that if anybody could pull it off, it would be them. Because I thought of Ready or Not, and it was just like, it was so brilliant. I thought anyways. And it really perfectly balanced humor and horror in a way that I didn't realize it at the time watching it, but I really hadn't seen done so well since the original Scream. So I thought, wow, this really could work.
I agree. You know, and it's like, I have a feeling that if we were able to ask Wes Craven how he felt, he'd, you know, through a Ouija board or something, he'd be like, have at it. Let's make it great. You know, I think he would probably support it in some surreal way. Yeah.
Well, I'm just looking, there's a couple of gossipy sites that says that Scream 6 is already being greenlit. We cannot confirm that, though. They're the gossipy sites, so who knows? I got to ask you real quick, just one sentence. What did you guys think of the Scream series on MTV?
The first season was good. I liked the first season. I thought it was, I missed the mask, and I don't know why they had to. I mean, I do know why. It's a licensing thing, but I felt like if they just had the mask, it would have been a lot better. But I think by the time they got to season 3, it was just a mess. In fact, Nate was in town. Nate, you were here when we saw the first episode of season 3. We had all big people get together. All these people came over to watch it, and we were all watching it, and we were all looking at each other like, it's gonna get better, right? I know people that have loved the third season and everything. I wasn't crazy about it, but yeah, I don't think I'll watch them again just because I'd rather watch the movies, and they weren't as engaging to me. Yeah. That's my honest opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
I didn't mind the first and second season. I kind of went in knowing. I don't want to say knowing. I accepted what it was. It was a series that was basically just borrowing the title. I wasn't expecting anything. I knew Ghostface wasn't in it. The Mask wasn't in it. I had fun with the first season. I liked seeing the slasher genre when I know it had been done before with that other TV series called Slasher. But I really had fun with them taking the slasher genre, which is notorious for, it's got to work in this little 90-minute to 2-hour setting, and they kind of spread it out long form for a series. I had fun with the first season. I had fun with the second season. And yeah, the third season was just a joke, in my opinion. It just wasn't.
Yeah.
Wasn't even, yeah. It was embarrassing.
So, look, do you have any other insightful observations or questions before we kind of wrap things up here?
I just think it'll be interesting to see what they do with today's technology and the new ones. Because, I mean, they did it with kind of the series, but kind of more in kind of like a CW kind of way. Not that there's anything wrong with CW, but like it'll be interesting with kind of that smart humor, how they'll take today's technology and move that kind of into the Scream kind of universe. Do you guys have any predictions of what they may kind of do?
I don't really have any predictions, but I agree 100% with what you're saying. I mean, they kind of looking back, they did it with Scream 4. Of course, there's in Scream 4, there's no voice changer now. It's an app on the phone, and they keep saying it like, well, we all have the app. So right off the bat, they established like everybody in town has that app on their phone, so anybody could be Ghostface. They kind of now everybody has a cell phone, so they kind of explain that they didn't get technical like with the first one where it's like, oh, we cloned the cell phone. It was a cloned cell phone. That doesn't really make sense today. I don't even know if that's possible. Yeah. So it was just like, well, Trevor called me. How did he call me if he's not the killer? And he's like, oh, I lost my phone. Someone stole it. Well, there's, you know what I mean? So they kind of figured out a way, which was one of the things I thought Scream 4 actually did right, was they figured out a way to make that kind of concept work for 2011 when it came out. But I do agree it's going to be interesting to see what they do with a 2020, 2021 Scream film.
Yeah, it's like it's built into what makes Scream work. It's like when they redefine the rules, it's like, they couldn't make Scream now because Shirley Sidney would have a Ring camera on her front door, and like her phone would buzz and she'd know she was being attacked. So I've joked with friends, it's like, you really can't be a serial killer now, or like you can't, because there's no way you could go sneaking around and peeking in at windows and shit like that. So I think that's what's fun. That's what's going to be fun about. I think a cheat would be, well, we're going to make it 1995 again. That would be cheating. But I think embracing the technology and everything, it's going to be fun. And if it's Scream, it's going to be good.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see too, like what movies or pop culture they'll bring into it. Like, will they try to go old school and bring back that kind of stuff about Jason or Freddy? Or are they going to go talking about like Ready or Not or other movies that are more kind of recent and try to kind of parody or talk about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are the horror movies that have come out since the last Scream that have developed new tropes? What are the new horror tropes? Yeah, the old ones aren't around anymore. Now it's like it followed you.
In Scream 4, was it Hayden Panettiere's character who like recites all those horror movies.
Yeah, like every
they have to do that, and it's like, what are they gonna say? And will audiences know all of those movies? I think the thing about when Scream came out, everybody knew Friday the 13th, and even if you were in the audience and they said, "Who's the killer in Friday the 13th?" 75% of the people were going to say Jason, because that's what they identify, and that's what made it so clever. When he's like, "You're wrong. It was Jason's mother." You know, and, you know, I don't know I think the problem with it's a great time to be a filmmaker and a bad time to be a filmmaker, because it's a great time because you can easily make one. There's tons of places that can distribute your project, your movie, and all of that. But the bad thing is that how do you get noticed? How does one movie get enough attention? And I think Scream was in theaters for a year. I mean, that's mind-boggling when you think about that. Nowadays, if you get a weekend, and well, nowadays with a pandemic, it's worse. But like, you don't have a run like that anymore with movies. So of course, everyone saw it because it was in theaters for a year. So that's another challenge. How do they stay referential and relevant when they have to appeal to mass people that will get the movie? If they appeal to a niche, it'll be easier. But if they want more people to get it, being on the joke, they have to do something different.
If I was giving advice to the writer, is it Kevin? Is Kevin back to write it? I don't know.
No, he's one of the producers on it. James Vanderbilt is the writer, and he wrote The Amazing Spider-Man, the two with
Andrew Garfield,
and he wrote Zodiac for David Fincher.
I think he's an Oscar winner. Like that's another thing about horror movies. Like Oscar winners are writing horror movies now. You know, back in 1989 when they made Halloween 5, there was no Oscar winner writing that movie. Like things have changed. That's horror now.
But remember some of those 70s, late 60s, 70s, those were Oscar caliber horror movies that would come out. Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah.
Even like, I always get his name wrong. The Oscar-winning composer Lalo Schifrin did the music for the Amityville Horror, and it's like they used to like care about their horror movies back then. It wasn't just like
budget too before Paranormal. Came out and lowered budgets of horror movies.
Yeah,
I've heard like the Blumhouse, which has exploded in popularity. It's developed great stories, but it's diminished the budgets that go into horror movies anymore. It's a victim of its own success that you don't need to spend all that money on horror movies. Yeah,
that's a lesson learned for a filmmaker. You know, I was talking with a filmmaker earlier tonight that made a movie for $13,000, and it made back its money, and it was a notable movie. It came back in 2005, and it was an older movie, but it's, you know, like I've known for you don't need a lot of money to make a horror movie, because horror movies are about escape and fear and isolation, and none of those things cost anything. So when the studios got a hold of them, it was more like the stars, the cachet. It was like, you know, the big studio release, you know, and it just by default, they cost money. But no, I think filmmakers now are relishing in the fact that they can spend a little bit and you know, and see a big return and a big reception.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Nev Campbell, she's going to be the killer in the next one.
You think so?
She's the killer.
It's all in your head.
She's a lot to be afraid about. Hey guys, thank you so much for coming on the show with us tonight and talking about one of my favorite franchises. I know, Luke, didn't you say that this was one of, like when you were a kid, your parents had to like take the videotape away because you watched it so much?
Yeah, I was obsessed. My friend Jake ripped he got a Blockbuster Video on VHS and then kind of ripped it off and like made his own little rant. He used the stickers of the like videotape and made like his own Scream out of that, and then he ended up buying the VHS so that he gave me his kind of old ransom looking one, and I showed everybody that came over the movie, and then eventually my mom's like, "You're watching this too much," and took it away and hid it until I like later found it, and then I'm like, "My other friend's over, he wants to watch it, can I please watch it?" And she's like, "Okay." So then I went to the drawer it was like hidden in, took it out, and then it never went back.
All right. But I just want to say thank you guys. This has been an awesome hour and 20 minutes that we've been talking about Scream. We could talk so much more. When the new film comes out, Anthony, Nate, I can't wait to hear what you guys think about it. But for now, the original Scream, 1996, one of the classics of the horror genre. We're so glad we got a chance to walk through it. Some of the best characters, best writing. It was a love letter to the horror films that had come before it. And hopefully it's not just a time capsule. Hopefully Scream 5 can kind of take up That's what I'm afraid of, is that with the time capsule is a thing of its time, and like it's going to be impossible to continue it. But we'll see. I think they got some smart people working on it. All right, Nate. If people want to find out, your opinions on the films or what you're working on next, where can people find you online?
Facebook, Twitter, and I think I have my information on your website, Anthony.
Just masimedia.net. It's MASIMEDIA.net. And Nate is our development executive.
Oh, fantastic. So I guess, Anthony, I was going to ask you next. People want to follow you, keep up with all the great stuff you guys are doing.
Yeah, Twitter. I don't use Twitter a lot, but I'm on there. It's at Masi Media. And Facebook, I'm on Masi Media. Easy to find me. Super easy.
Awesome. Cheeseman.
Well, you can find me right here at Cheese on Couch on thescareguy.com. And I just want you to know to live her alone, people. Live her alone. Live her.
All right, you can find me on Twitter at Jim Fry LA. That's Jim Fry FRYE LA. You can find me on Instagram at James D Fry. Also, always just if you ever want to find us, thescareguy.com. That's where we're at. And thank you to that hashtag show for hosting our podcast right now. Guys, happy Halloween 2020. It's going to be a whole different thing as we go out. What are you doing for Halloween 2020? How are you going to celebrate?
Oh, I have a bunch of drive-through events that are coming up this month.
Could you tell us
there's a couple of them that looked really great. Tomorrow night, I'm going to see Halloween and Halloween 2 at a drive-in, which I should tell you about. The Screamfest Horror Film Festival is doing both movies at a pop-up drive-in at the Regency in Van Nuys.
Nice.
So I'm going there. I'm going to see that. And Halloween 4 and 5 is a week from now, so I'm going to see that. Yeah, I think it's just a matter of just, being safe and I'm doing some Zoom parties with friends and things like that. Look, Halloween is not over for me.
Nope.
It's be just as fun.
It's not. Nate, how are you celebrating?
I'm actually taking Channing the day before Halloween to the camp from the original Friday the 13th for a tour. I've been there. I went the second time they ever did a tour about 6 years ago, and now they're allowing all ages tours. So.
And it's Camp Nobi Bosco, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That is awesome. That is awesome. I don't know what I'm doing yet. Me and Cheeseman had talked about throwing in one of those safely distanced rotational parties. 6 people can show up at a time. You're there for an hour. You move on. We'll see. I went to a party like that, someone's birthday party like that this year, where you show up, you sit in your section, you don't mix, you bring your own refreshments, and then you leave.
You wear your Ghostface mask. That's all you have to do.
Anyways, guys. You guys have been fantastic. Thank you for coming on the show tonight, and we hope to talk to you guys a lot more. May Scream live forever. Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. It was fun.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye. See you guys later.